Why? Because before, when you're impoverished, you need a large family to take care of you when you're old. If you get wealthy, you don't want that because it's a drain on your finances and so forth. And most nations that have become more wealthy over a period of a generation or so have seen their growth rate plummet dramatically because people don't want as many children as they used to have. So I think if we were to create wealth for these people, it would actually do more to create a stable population than by the methods that you're talking about, fertility control and that type of thing, and much faster as well, because there's a natural incentive then for people not to have large families rather than the punishment or the bootstrap approach that they're taking now in these third world nations. The other thing that I have to really recognize, and I can't say I can address it to any great extent, is the eugenics side of it. These people have always been big on eugenics and creating the perfect human being and all the rest. And as a consequence, if you have population control, you can begin to introduce eugenics into it and keep certain people from reproducing while allowing other people to reproduce. That's a pretty hard statement to make, I know, but it is part of their background, and I think it needs to be recognized.
No, I mean, that's exactly what we've documented. Of course, Hitler got his eugenicist ideas from the British before the whole Nazi Germany thing about, you know, infanticiding babies, disabled people, etc., etc. It didn't start with Hitler. And as he said, I mean, Brazil, India, their economies are rapidly developing, and as a result, the birth rate is naturally decreasing, which shows, as you said, if you give these countries wealth, property, and prosperity, the problem ceases to exist. I think we got a taste of what life under Agenda 21 would be like. I don't know if you saw this. There was a group, this was last year, it was called Forum for the Future, and it was this charitable organization linked with the British government. And they put out a video called Plandopolis, and this was basically a nightmare technocratic future scenario, which they were basically advocating. Mm-hmm. And it showed where, you know, only the super rich elite would be allowed to drive cars in cities. Meat would be rationed by a global food council. And it was just this horrible dystopian future which they were actually advocating under this Agenda 21 system. How will our experience of life be characterized under Agenda 21 in the future if this plan is allowed to be fully implemented?
You know, that's a very good question. I just finished a novel by James Patterson called Toys, T-O-Y-S. I wasn't really enthused about going into it, but the more I read on it, the more I realized that this is exactly where Agenda 21 is taking us. I don't know if Mr. Patterson had any kind of insight as to where Agenda 21 is going to do, but it basically sets up a society of elites and the peasantry. And basically, the elites had anything they wanted, and the peasants were basically just the providers. They just provided the materials and so forth that the elites needed to have, because the elites, you know, one of the things that is very interesting about this whole concept, if you develop an elite class, the elite class can do nothing. I mean, they're not capable of doing hardly anything in a practical sense, because they depend upon everyone else to provide them all the goods and services that they want. And once that's entrenched into a society, they have to depend upon the peasantry, keep them under control in order to provide them on a continuous basis all the goods and services that they want. And that particular book was astonishing from the standpoint and the insights of how this could happen. I'm not saying it's going to happen that way, but if you want to see one version of what could happen with Agenda 21, read Patterson's Toys book. It is entertaining and it's very illuminating in the sense of what could happen. The other thing that I kind of want to mention here is that in some ways there are several places in this country that we've already seen some of the restrictions of Agenda 21, at least with land rights or land use aspects of it. The upstate New York, the Adirondack State Park. The Adirondack State Park Commission was created in 1971, implemented in 1973, and it's a horror story because in this 6 million acre park, a little more than half is owned by private property, individuals. The rest of it's owned by the government. And they now have a commission that decides everything that these private landowners can do, literally everything. How much they can build, whether they can build, how many acres is required, and all the rest that goes into living on a piece of land. And you can drive through the Adirondack State Park today, and it's like driving through the 1960s because nothing has changed. This is the future of Agenda 21. In fact, it is so pronounced that we believe that Agenda 21, much of the property or land use restrictions that are built into Agenda 21 came from the success story of government basically squashing the rights of private property rights in the Adirondack State Park in upstate New York. It is literally astonishing. And that's a classic example of where we're going, at least with the land use side of it, in the future if we don't stop this massive effort. Here in the United States, for those who are listening that are part of the United States, recognize that we're not implementing Agenda 21 per se here in this country. We're implementing what's called Sustainable America. Sustainable America was created by Bill Clinton, the President's Council on Sustainable Development, back in the mid-1990s in order to fulfill the requirements of Agenda 21. So we are actually implementing Agenda 21 through this Sustainable America program in which every federal agency now has as its operating goals. And if there's any kind of grant given to a state agency or a local community, it always has these kinds of restrictions attached to it because that is now their goal is no longer to serve the American people, but to protect the environment from the American people. And I'm sure that's starting to happen in other parts of the world as well.
I mean, it's frightening. Obviously, it's not got this bad yet, but you can look through history at every classical tyranny, particularly in the East with the communist system. I mean, that's the first thing that the Maoist Cultural Revolution did, was seize people's property and turn it all over to the state and make people, you know, work for the state on these collectivized farms. So while it's far from that situation yet, that's the kind of the taste, the raison d'etre that this Agenda 21 is founded in. How can people in their own lives go about resisting Agenda 21 in terms of the decisions they make and the lifestyle choices that they make in their lives?
It's one of the things that has been very active here in this country because of the so-called Tea Party movement. The Tea Party movement have gotten a hold of Agenda 21 and realized what's happening, and they have made it a primary focus. And I would hope that this is happening in other parts of the world too. In the case of global warming and alternative energy there in Britain and Germany and Denmark and France and Italy and so forth, Spain, all of these people, all these countries, if you can organize into groups that will fight legislation and so forth at the local and intermediate as well as the national level, you're going to start having some influence, and it's already happening here in this country. It's amazing what's happened in the last year. I've been fighting Agenda 21 since it was first created in 1992, and it wasn't until last year that it has started to spread to enough groups around the United States that is really starting to have an impact now in local communities, in comprehensive planning. I don't know what they call it in Europe, but here it's called smart growth or comprehensive planning. And basically, I don't disagree with planning. I think we need to plan for utility lines and all the rest that goes along with it. But this goes far beyond this. This goes to social issues kind of planning. And once you start getting into the social issues, you're losing your freedoms, because the only way a community can provide services like that to all of the members of the community is by taking them away from individual members of the community that should otherwise have them exclusively to their private property rights.
And of course, that ties into states taking people to prison or attempting to, simply for growing vegetables in their own back garden and so forth.
Yes.
I mean, we've had this massive revolution, not just in America, but across Europe, of people turning back to the land to grow their own vegetables. And I guess that's a key part of what you're saying there.
Yes, it is. In fact, we've had legislation in this last year at the federal level that is going to prohibit the sale of anything grown locally that is not served first has a permit by either the federal or the state governments in order to be able to sell their produce and so forth. Otherwise, they'll go to jail. Now, that hasn't been implemented yet. There's been a lot of backlash against it. However, it is one of those issues that, just as you're saying here, it is creeping in. And this is what is so disturbing, is that it's not happening all at once. If it happened all at once, you would have a tremendous backlash on the part of the population. But it's gradually being implemented. We're now going into year 30 since the Agenda 21 was first introduced in the world in 1992. And basically what we're seeing is a gradual, implementation slowly, so that people like a frog in a gradually warming pot of water doesn't notice what's happening until it's too late. And the best way to try to get this out is what we've done here in this country, is education of those people who are concerned about it, organized into groups, and are willing to take action, because it requires us to take action, to go to town meetings and that sort of thing, to voice your concerns and to protest, if necessary, certain actions being taken by the community government right up to the national government. And it's starting to happen here. It's a long ways from what it needs to be, but at least it's starting to happen in the first time that I've seen in over 25 years.
And finally, Doctor, tell people about your website and where people can go to get your material and more information on Agenda 21.
Well, one of the things that I have now is an actual website called epi-us.com. That's E as in Edward, P as in Paul, I as in intelligent, dash US, like United States, .com. There I have all of my products and services and so forth listed for people to be able to see. More specifically, I have a website called emergingscience.us that goes into the global warming issues. Tremendous website in the sense of finding out information as to what really is behind global warming. My DVD called Global Warming Emerging Science basically interviews 24 different scientists from around the world, explaining why man cannot be causing global warming. And we have a news page on that particular site that goes into what's happening currently in the news on this particular issue. My recent book, called Rescuing a Broken America, is on rescuingamericabook.com, Rescuing American Book. That has been a powerful book this last year in helping people understand what's happening in this country. I'm not so sure how useful it might be around the world, but we have had orders from Australia, even England, for that particular book, because it does reveal so much about the global agenda that it helps even those who are not necessarily part of this country and under its legal system. So those are the primary websites, epi-us.com, emergingscience.us, and rescuingamericabook.com. I think if you were able to go to those, you would see most of what we have available to help provide the information that you need to be more effective.
Okay, that's going to wrap it up then. Dr. Michael Coffman, we really appreciate you joining us on Infowars Nightly News, and we look forward to speaking with you again. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Okay, folks, thanks for tuning in once again to Infowars Nightly News. We'll see you on the next edition. Take care.
Why? Because before, when you're impoverished, you need a large family to take care of you when you're old. If you get wealthy, you don't want that, because it's a drain on your finances and so forth. And most nations that have become more wealthy over a period of a generation or so have seen their growth rate plummet dramatically, because people don't want as many children as they used to have. So I think if we were to create wealth for these people, it would actually do more to create a stable population than by the methods that you're talking about, fertility control and that type of thing. and much faster as well, because there's a natural incentive then for people not to have large families, rather than to introduce eugenics into it and keep certain people from reproducing while allowing other people to reproduce. That's a pretty hard statement to make, I know, but it is part of their background, and I think it needs to be recognized.
No, I mean, that's exactly what we've documented. Of course, Hitler got his eugenicist ideas from the British before the whole Nazi Germany thing about, you know, infanticiding babies, disabled people, etc., etc. It didn't start with Hitler. And as he said, I mean, Brazil, India, their economies are rapidly developing, and as a result, the birth rate is naturally decreasing, which shows, as you said, if you give these countries wealth, property, and prosperity, the problem ceases to exist.
The punishment or the bootstrap approach that they're taking now in these third world nations. The other thing that I have to really recognize, and I can't say I can address it to any great extent, is the eugenics side of it. These people have always been big on eugenics and creating the perfect human being and all the rest. And as a consequence, if you have population control, you can begin